3, 2, 1. Vic Rayner, you are the Executive Director for the National Care Forum. You are a trustee for the Care Workers Charity. You're also a trustee for Hestia. Welcome to the Care Home Show.
Thank you, Simon.
My absolute pleasure. So you're somebody that's been involved in the care and support sectors for a long time. Where did it all start for you?
Well, I have, you're right, been involved in care and support for quite some time. And I think my interest in it probably stems from interest in politics more generally, from an interest in working in the not-for-profit sector, so getting very involved at quite a young age in a whole range of different voluntary activities, volunteering for organisations like Rape Crisis, working with Victim Support, Citizens Advice Bureau, working in a community voluntary service sector. So really getting involved with the community as a whole. And through that engagement, coming across, particularly in the early stage of my career, housing support charities. So I worked for a while for Women's Aid, providing support for women escaping domestic violence situations, and then went on to work in a whole range of other types of organisation that offered direct support to individuals in times of need. And I guess understanding in that context that what knitted a lot of these organisations together was seeking to support people to live as independent a life as they possibly could. So the kind of theme, I guess, connecting all those organisations and those job roles together is that I was wanting to do things that could influence the individual circumstances of individuals' lives and ensure that the care, the support that they needed was the best that they could get in order to live the independent life that they wanted.
Something that really strikes me about is the fact that you're very, very focused on people and predominantly, let's say, vulnerable people as a whole. But you take kind of a very kind of global, kind of macro view with all of that. So, what's your personal kind of connection, if you like, because that's quite an interesting, let's say, kind of perspective and view on the sector. How did that all come together?
So from a personal point of view, I suppose one of my earliest kind of memories is my mother was an occupational therapist, and worked at that time in long-stay psychiatric institutions. So as a child, I have memories of going to work with her and spending time in those organisations, finding out more about the people who were living there, and feeling that that there was a kind of connection to working with people to make their, to support changes in their lives, I think for me, it's very connected to a theme around social justice. So I think for people who pick a career in the care sector now, and I know we're going to talk about this in a little bit more detail, but for people who are picking a career in care, what they really are picking is a career is a social justice career. It's something that's actually saying, I'm going to do the things that will help people and work with people to achieve the ambitions they have, achieve the goals they have. And the system doesn't always help them to do that. So actually we need organisations like care providers, housing support providers who can help them make those changes.
It seems like that's kind of almost your purpose as an individual to kind of operate within the roles that you've had. That's obviously something that's very consistent and something that means an awful lot to you. And it sounds like that's I talk a lot about what's the kind of the positive change that you want to see in the world. It sounds like that's within the framework of what you've just described, and that's where you put your time and energy.
Yes, and I'm very privileged in the role that I have now and in roles I've had previously to have insight into some of the things that make that happen. Mm-hmm. So that's not just working, partly that's working across that whole sector. So part of that is doing lots of work with people who are in receipt of care and support services and listening to them and working with them to ensure that I understand, what's the things that will change their lives, working with organisations and identifying organisations who have enabled their vision and values and mission to be put into practice in ways that are really radically changing people's lives, and working with commissioners as well, who are at different times during my career, working with a whole range of different types of commissioners from health and local authority backgrounds, and now individual commissioners as well through personal budgets, and trying to sort of identify what are the kind of solutions to some of the tricky challenges affecting the sector.
Of which, of course, there are many.
There are many, and obviously then in my role being having the opportunity to go and talk to politicians and civil servants about some of those as well. So I think you're right in the sense that I've made it some of my purpose and values in life, but very, very much focusing on what the solutions are. So being very kind of solution orientated in everything that I try to do. So I'm always looking to see how I can piece together things, how I can bring together ideas and give people a kind of coherent solution to some of those difficulties. Sure,
and it's great that you are so solutions focused. There's a lot of talk. There's a lot of challenges, and there doesn't seem to be that much movement, if you like. So anyone that's going to try and turn the dial upon the sector needs to not just work out, okay, so here are all the challenges. We need to say, okay, so here are the positive steps that we can make towards making a real difference. And it doesn't matter whether it's a small difference or a big difference over a period of time. It's trying to get that kind of energy and inertia to just push things forwards.
Well, I think like a lot of the very difficult challenges that organisations and communities face is that, of course, they're not one-dimensional in any shape or form. So the difficulty is always going to be identifying solutions that shift us in a positive direction. They won't solve everything. I mean, nothing, unfortunately, is as straightforward as that. So I think, it is about finding things that do continue to move us forward. And I think, as I said, underpinned by those kind of social justice principles. It's very interesting if you look particularly to Scotland at the moment. They've been doing an awful lot of work around within the care sector, and they're using the human rights framework to kind of drive a lot of that forward. And I think it's a very useful framework for us to think about in England as well, in terms of how we view the kind of things that are happening within the sector and the things that we want to happen through that kind of rights-based lens.
Explain a little bit more about that, because that's probably something that it's an interesting perspective that people maybe in England might not understand exactly everything that's going on in Scotland.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's really about trying to look at all the different kind of elements of how care is delivered in Scotland. And we have obviously a different system in Scotland, so some of the care is free at the point of contact. So very different to how we operate here. But I think it's more about how you put together a kind of approach to regulation, how you put together an approach to commissioning and to provision, which recognises that you have to start from the basis that everybody has a series of rights and entitlements, and that all the services that you offer have to be wrapped around that.
It sounds like we've got some things to learn from the Scots.
We've got some fantastic things to learn from all of our kind of countries who are part of the United Kingdom, and we're lucky within the National Care Forum. We work across what we call a group called the Five Nations Forum, which includes all of the UK plus the Republic of Ireland, and we work together to try and see where we can learn from each other. And I think that's a very important part of certainly our organisation's kind of understanding of some of the different challenges facing us, and not just across the UK, but we also try and work internationally as well. So we've got very strong connections with colleagues within Australia, and we host various tours from Australia who come here and share learning and understanding from the kind of Australian care sector. And similarly, we're part of the Global Ageing Network, and I'm going off to Canada in September to talk about some of the work that we're doing here, and some of the kind of, with a kind of global panel to talk about some of the issues that affecting economies, looking across the world, looking kind of ageing communities.
It's really interesting, and I mean, 100% agree. There's so much that can be learned from different countries. It would be really interesting. Maybe we should have a chat offline about maybe some of these other people that sit in kind of on the global stage and things like that. Try and hopefully catch them in London at some point, so we can do an episode with them as well. Because I think there is a lot to be learned from other people, and I think one of the things that I feel, I've only been in the sector a relatively short amount of time, but I'm a massively curious person, so I spend a lot of time asking people lots of questions. Part of the reason why I decided to do a podcast, I felt like that was one of my core skills. But when I ask people around how they feel about what's going on in care, more specifically care homes, just because that's kind of the realm in which we operate. But people seem to be becoming more open-minded, and they want to go and find out about what's going on in different regions, in different countries. Just generally being more open-minded to how can we improve things, how can we take things to the next level. So it must be, you have a very unique perspective in that. In that you have had the opportunity and continue to have the opportunity to have conversations with people from all over the globe, which must be quite exciting as well.
No, very, very, very exciting. And I mean, I'll tell you a little bit about the National Care Forum if I can, just
Please
because
do, absolutely.
I think that really ties up with that. So the National Care Forum is a membership organisation. It's for not-for-profit care providers, so charities, organisations that have been set up as community interest companies, local authority trading companies, and not-for-profit organisations of a whole different range of structures, housing associations, etc. But one of the things that they are all very, very good at doing and very interested in doing is sharing and networking and supporting each other in that way. And I think therein lies the kind of future for organisations, because we have a sector that's got sort of 22,000 providers within it. It's a very, very fractured market, and therefore it's really difficult for new ideas, for new initiatives to take off.
Sure.
So what the National Care Forum is able to do is to share that best practice across those organisations very easily and very quickly. And I think you're right. I think we are in a time where people are perhaps not looking in the same way that they might have done to government and others to steer the direction. They're recognising that some of that change has got to come from within the sector as a whole.
Absolutely.
And I think, you see that not just in terms of the organisations who are already within the sector, but those who are kind of emerging and getting involved through different elements of it. So new sort of entrants into the kind of supply chain of care that are busy changing the market and changing the way things that are done.
Really interesting. Okay, so and from the perspective of the NCF, what's your vision for the organisation? What's the positive change that you want to see in the world from the perspective of the NCF specifically?
I think there are a couple of things that we're very interested in seeing how we can improve. I think one of those is absolutely getting the message out there that there is really great care available. Mm-hmm. I completely understand why there is a focus within media and programming, etc., around some of the negative stories about care. I understand that's where it's easy to pick up on stories around that, but the knock-on impact of that is hugely damaging for mostly for people who need care and support. I think if you were to watch some of the programmes that have been on recently in terms of kind of expose type programmes, my huge fear is that what you will do is you will scare people who desperately need access to good quality care and support from taking that up at the time that they need it. And therein perpetuating that sort of crisis-born engagement with care that most people have, particularly the older age end of the spectrum. So I think, one of the things that we're all working very hard on within the organisation is getting that message across to people that there is great care out there. The regulators sort of talks about, I think the latest figures are something like 78% of care provision is rated as good. That's a fantastic, great news story, 100%. And yet that is not
Not many people know
anywhere
that.
in the kind of average media. So I think, generally people are the people who need care are being frightened by some of those stories. So I think there's something about that. And I think one of our other really strong messages that we're focused on is about not only the need to innovate within the care sector, but the level of innovation that's going on at the moment. I was asked by somebody if I could think of an example of where care is represented within the media, particularly within sort of TV and films. And I really, really struggled to find even an example that I could think of in my mind where actually care provision kind of features in any sort of significant way. Anyway, I ended up with some film that I won't go into now, but the representation of the residential care provision was really appalling. It was really about people making as much money as they could out of it, and the people on the receiving end getting a very, very raw deal. So what we always struggle with, I think, in care at the moment is that we have a terrible news story about the health service, for example, and then come Saturday night, you can turn on Call the Midwife or Casualty or whatever it might be, and suddenly we're in love again with the characters.
Sure. Yeah.
In there, and I think there's something about how we kind of need to sort of shift that kind of that narrative around that, so that we're back into a position where people understand.
It's interesting, isn't it? One of the things that I'm really, really cognizant of is the fact that, let's say, mainstream media, at the moment it's hard to sell a good news story. It is. I'm no expert on this, but I've been told that the mainstream media organisations, that they're in trouble to a certain extent, and that their profit margins are being eroded by digital, probably stuff like this. But that they're in a position where for them to sell, they have to create quite contentious headlines and all that type of stuff, and that clickbaity type headline, whether it be anything to do with care or otherwise, it's not. It doesn't count for good quality journalism. People don't get that kind of real understanding of what's going on, and that from kind of a macro above the kind of the care sector, that has negative impacts on probably all sorts of sectors. When we're talking about vulnerable people, it creates a negative perception from a consumer perspective. People think, oh, well, mum's got to receive some type of care package, whatever that might look like. Where do I start? It's an absolute minefield. All people that run care businesses are horrendous, or care organisations, I should say, are these horrendous beasts, and they're all going to end up in kind of Winterbourne scandal type sets of circumstances, and it's just not the case.
No.
And it's sad. One of the there's a million and one reasons why I decided to launch the podcast, but part of the reason why I wanted to do this was to try and alter the perception of the care sector, to make it freely available to everyone and anyone that wanted to kind of sit and listen to me and the people that I have on as guests, to be able to share that actually, you know what, there is some really fantastic stuff going on at the moment. You just don't hear about it a lot. So
you don't hear about it a lot, and we're part of the solution to that, in a sense. Not just National Care Forum, but all of these media are an opportunity for us to tell some of those stories, and I we make it much more. I think it's like a lot of these things, you wouldn't start here. Actually, we've created such a complex system that you'll hear people, whether they're in politics or very senior positions within organisations, saying, I'm trying to do this with my own family, and I can't understand how to get the care I need. I can't understand how to get the assessment. I'm not sure where, So we've made a very, very complicated picture of our own. And I think, there are things that we certainly are doing more of to try and simplify things. There's things that we've, the recent reports by the Competition and Market Authority around kind of transparency in the care sector and recognition of the kind of need to focus on consumer rights are important in that sense, because they're creating a sort of understanding that it's important to have that transparency, that people need to get the information they need when they're making that decision. Because that, we know that decision will continue to be largely based on a crisis. And if it's going to be in a crisis, then the last thing you need to find when you're in a crisis is that you can't work out your way how to get out of it. We need to make it really clear, really simple, really straightforward for people so they know what they can get, where they can get it, and what quality it is.
How do we do that, though?
Well, I think part of the way we do that is by being much more open. So, fantastic opportunity coming up in a couple of weeks' time. We've got Care Home Open Day, national initiative to encourage care organisations across the country and wider. It's become a global kind of mission to get care organisations to open their door and people to feel freely able to come in. Most great organisations are open all the time anyway, but often people will need a little bit of extra encouragement. Come on in.
Exactly, yeah, a bit of positive reinforcement.
Yes, and I think, also I see lots of very exciting work going on in the context of intergenerational working. So one of the very positive TV programmes that there was recently was the Care Home for 4-year-olds.
Absolutely.
Where people fell very in love with the relationship that was very clear between the older people within those settings and those young 4-year-olds, those enthusiastic balls of energy. And what was great by the end of the programme is you couldn't tell who was the most enthusiastic ball of energy because everybody was taking part, everyone was involved.
What I really enjoyed, I haven't watched the latest episode. I think I was away when it was aired, but in the original episode there was one gentleman that seemed particularly disinterested.
Yes.
And then again, I can't remember the gentleman's name, but by the end of it he was so happy, he was so engaged.
Hamish.
The kids, Hamish, that was it. Thank you very much. And I remember just thinking that's delightful. Like it's, again, there's people around the country sat there and watched that, people who've got nothing to do with care who thought, that's wonderful.
Yes.
That's wonderful.
Well, and I worked with people who have been pushing forward intergenerational models of care for years, and this just opened the door. And an interesting sort of thing that I think came out of that is that there was equal interest in a sense from people who wanted to know how to make their own setting intergenerational, and from those people who were saying, if I need to live somewhere or if I need to find somewhere for my parents or relatives or whatever, I want it to be intergenerational. So suddenly a kind of real, an opportunity for people to be much more open in that sense. And care homes particularly are fantastic community assets. I mean, I think our language about communities has changed quite dramatically over the last 10 to 15 years. And one of the reasons for that is because of austerity. So when you're in a situation where you've got local government pulling back from all sorts of things like libraries and bus services and the list kind of goes on, communities do have to find a way to respond.
Sure.
And care homes actually are a fantastic community asset because often they've got communal space available. They've got quite large parts of the locally employed community working there. They've got some really, often they're great hives, and certainly within our membership in the not-for-profit sector, great opportunities for volunteering, maybe skill development, maybe people returning into work environment from periods of ill health themselves. So they've got lots to offer, support for carers as well. And I think organisations are really beginning to see the power of that. So we've got lots of members now who are looking again at the day centre model and thinking about how they might offer that within their services, offering a respite for carers, alternative support for people who need it, and so forth. We've got other organisations who are busy thinking about how they play kind of roles in terms of training and education for local communities. So I just think openness is part of it. I was really struck by, I'm sure you saw the programme recently about Alston Hall, and the very difficult programme that was to watch, absolutely things are being done about that. But one of the comments that struck me from the specialists who were watching that was this notion that we all have some accountability, in a sense, for how care services run within our own community. And his comment was that services should be like Piccadilly Circus, that actually that kind of systemic abuse that you saw there just shouldn't be able to happen because people are in and out all the time.
Exactly. Yeah.
There's just this is an open space. Yes, it's people's homes, but it's homes where people come into, and people but people are part of it. So I just think that there's something about. It's not the complete answer to your question, but one of the things about how do you make it more possible for people to know the journey is that they've got a foot in the journey before they need it. And they've volunteered, they've visited people, they've been involved in cake sales or whatever it might be. There's lots and lots of ways to get engaged with organisations.
It's interesting because this is somewhat anecdotal, and I should probably go and just sit and look through some of the people that we work with over the years. But I'd say that there will be a direct correlation between the openness of a care provider being an important part of the community, and as you say, having all sorts of different people coming in whatever context that might look like, summer fairs, bake sales, just being more open. There's a direct correlation probably to the quality of the care, and then also to the sustainability of the organisation itself. Because if you're an integral part of the community and people feel comfortable with you as an organisation and somewhere whether they're somebody that is going to receive care at any point or just somebody that's in the community that will have a perception, the likelihood is if they've engaged with an open community, an open care home, they're going to have, their perception it creates energy. That's what I'm trying to get to.
Yes.
So there's a point.
Yes. I don't know if you could make a direct correlation, but clearly it's part of the well-led criteria.
100%.
So that engagement with the community, that engagement with a wide range of stakeholders is clearly something that the regulator looks for, and I would concur. If you've got that sort of openness and agenda, then actually it's going to be somewhere that not only people are going to want to come and receive your care and support you offer, but also people are going to want to come and work there, which is one of the really, really big challenges for organisations across the board.
Absolutely. Well, I know that's one that we're going to unpack in a little bit. So anything else you'd like to bring up relevant to the NCF before we move on to the Care Workers Charity?
I think, I've mentioned the fact that we're very interested in connecting organisations together, and that's a big part of the work we do. We have a whole range of forums and opportunities for people to learn from each other and connect with each other. I think the other things that we're very interested in, as I mentioned, is around innovation, and we certainly see that a lot of our members are leading in the context of innovation across all sorts of things, whether it's about being involved in teaching care home projects, whether it's about intergenerational working, whether it's about digital innovation, whether it's about operating new service models. There's lots and lots of innovation going on there, so focusing around that. I think another big area that we're interested in is around evidence. One of the things that the care sector needs to get an awful lot better at is being able to evidence what it says it does.
Sure.
I talk to lots of organisations who tell me that the way that they support people with dementia, or the way that they operate their services is better or much better than the previous model, etc. But they don't have any data to back that up.
Sure, yeah.
And I think we have got a wide variety of data to gather in that context, but also we've got a big gap in terms of the skills within organisations to know what to do with that information once you've got it.
Sure.
Because it's one thing to gather it, and then it's another to use it to drive and deliver improvements towards services. So there's lots of work that we can help them with around that in terms of connecting them to different organisations, but also making sure that we get that evidence together in a coherent way that sells the value of care.
Absolutely.
We're also very interested in leadership. We run a great programme called the Rising Stars programme, which is for managers who are nominated by their organisations and they have been in their post for sort of less than a year. They don't have to have only been a manager for less than a year, but just they've come into an organisation, the organisation said, this person's really going to do something. And then we've constructed a sort of support program for them, which is not a traditional learning and development program. It's more about skilling them up for the future, in a sense. So we put together a whole range of opportunities for them, including chances to get used to the media, so get used to sitting in front of a camera and asking and answering questions. So some work around that. We've got people who are sharing with them some information about what the digital future is going to look like and how they can become kind of digital leaders in that context. We've got opportunities for them to understand about key challenges around recruitment and retention. So also, but experience days in a sense more than a kind of typical learning and development program. So that's very exciting. And we're also doing a bit of that work around governance, because all of these organisations that work within our membership are generally managed by not volunteering trustees or non-executive directors, so supporting them as much as we can. And then the final thing is about growth. I mean, I think the not-for-profit model is a fantastic model for the delivery of care and for the kind of safety and security of public services, and I want to see that grow and expand as we move forward.
I get the impression that we could probably literally just create a whole episode about the NCF. So hopefully we'll have the opportunity to come and unpack some of these subjects and things later on. I would be delighted to have you back on in the future and things. So let's keep this an open loop. We'll set the context today, and then we'll have plenty of opportunities to talk about some of that stuff. So. Is there anything specifically, again, I'm not trying to hurry along in any way, shape or form, but is there anything else specifically that you'd like to talk about from an NCF perspective?
No, I'll bring it back in. Don't worry. I'll find a way to say it.
Good stuff. We'll do another episode on anything that we don't cover off today. So,
yes. Okay.
You're also a trustee of the Care Workers Charity. That's
yes.
a charity that's one that's very close to my heart. By the time that this episode's gone out, I will have climbed. Me and I think it's 119 other people will have climbed up Snowdon to raise money for the charity, and I think the target's £45,000 this year.
Yes, I think it's,
I think it was 90 people that did the Three Peaks Challenge last year, and £35,000 was raised. So going all in on this one,
Fantastic.
and hopefully we'll smash the target.
Yep.
Heaven only knows how I'm going to feel on Friday.
Well,
all I know is that
you'd have to look out for my colleague Helen from NCF, who's also walking it.
Oh, splendid! I'd tell Helen to come and find me. I shall keep an eye out for her as well. It would be lovely to chat to her. It's going to be a big old hike, that one. But
yes, you'll notice I'm not climbing.
Probably. How did you get away with it?
I think it's a fantastic charity. It's an absolutely vital charity, and I'm very pleased and proud to be part of that trustee board. I think it's an organisation that is really finding its feet now and understanding that it can not only help support individuals who are in need of kind of care themselves, often because they've fallen into positions of financial hardship, but also that it can help the care workers as a whole by providing some really clear messaging and understanding of what being a care worker is about, and often some of the very significant difficulties and financial hardships that care workers might experience. So
just to put that in context as well, so the CWC, the Care Workers Charity, it was set up as a benevolent fund for the care sector, but then it's undergoing a bit of a transformation at the moment, isn't it? So Alex Ramamurthy, who will be a guest in the future, passed on the baton to Richard Muncaster, who will also be on in the future as their new CEO. I know that they've got some big bold plans around how the benevolent fund will always be an important part of that, but really creating I guess a conduit to supporting the well-being of carers so that they can be more proactive, so that hopefully they don't end up in situations where hardship is a set of circumstances that presents them. I think that's kind of the shift that they're trying to achieve.
There's lots of things we can talk about in relation to care workers, but one of the dominant themes, and if you will have seen this in the context of the discussion around the decisions by the Migration Advisory Committee and others, is that care workers are low paid. There is lots and lots of evidence around that position that care workers are in, and that means that for a lot of people there are very difficult and juggling financial circumstances in that situation is really hard. So yes, I think where the charity has got to is that we understand that not only can we help people, individuals, but we can also help add our voice to the message about trying to aid people whilst they're in work and whilst they're able to make some changes, and where they're able to make some changes to help them to do some of that, but also to recognise that this isn't just about somebody's individual circumstances. Some of these are a result of kind of systemic situations that people find themselves in the context of, insecure housing, insecure job roles, and so forth.
Absolutely. I've had the pleasure of spending a bit of time with Richard recently around and just getting to know kind of him as he's relatively new into post and understanding what his vision and what he wants to be able to achieve in the future. And I know that there's a, not that there wasn't before, but there's a huge amount of energy and passion that's going on into the kind of transition into what they're trying to achieve in the future, and it's really, really good to see. So it must be very interesting holding a trustee positionship within such a fantastic organisation. Yeah. So yeah, no, that's really, really interesting. Can't persuade you to climb up Snowdon. Last minute opportunity to run up a hill.
Not this Friday, sadly. I'm already up in Sheffield, not up a mountain, but up in Sheffield.
Got you. No problem at all. Well, I'll keep trying to persuade you. I'll reel you in for the next one. I've made it my job as an unofficial ambassador to try and rope as many people into as many CWC things as possible.
See, you're worrying me already if there's ropes involved. I could have sworn last time I went up Snowdon in flip-flops. No.
Hopefully there won't be any. Hopefully there won't be any need for any ropes on this particular occasion. But I'll let you know once we've finished.
Yeah, that's great.
So tell me about Hestia. So the NCF is an organisation that I'm learning more and more about. The Care Workers charity. Again, I'm an unofficial ambassador and sponsor of some of the stuff that they do. Hestia is not an organisation that I know about. So start from scratch. Tell me a little bit more about Hestia.
Hestia is a London-based charity, and it's one that I knew very well from previous role working more in supported housing, and it's a very interesting organisation in that it covers a whole range of different services that it offers and different clients that it works with. So it has a very big presence in London as a refuge provider, so supporting women who are survivors of domestic abuse. And it's also the UK-wide proponent of a campaign called UK Says No More. I don't know if you've heard about that.
I haven't, no.
So UK Says No More is an international campaign around saying no to domestic violence. Mm-hmm. And it originated in the States and it's been brought over to the UK by Hestia. So we run kind of national weeks around that and very involved in kind of raising the profile around that particular campaign. It also provides support to lots of people who have lived experience of homelessness and long-term mental health services, offering recovery cafes and within London. It's done a lot of work in a variety of different London boroughs. It's been working very extensively with people who were impacted by the Grenfell fire. So a whole range of different support services that it offers across London in all sorts of different settings. It also offers a number of regulated care services too. So I really like being involved in it because I think it gives me a strong sense of connection to a whole range of kind of policy and issues around kind of welfare reform, around housing agendas, around kind of health and mental health commissioning and so forth that I just want to stay in touch with and connected with. Homelessness and a lot of these areas of work have been a passion of mine for very many years, and whilst I get small bits of it through the care sector, it's good to continue to have that really strong connection with it as a trustee.
Understood. Interestingly, lived experience is a phrase that I only heard on Friday through Sanjay Droner.
Okay.
He and I got together in the afternoon after we ended up chatting the
Yeah.
other day, actually. And no, I hadn't heard of it before. Explain, just in case that hopefully people will have heard of it, and I'm just being a neophyte to that particular phrase. But explain what a lived experience is for those of people that haven't heard of that particular phrase before.
Well, I think it's one of those phrases that have kind of come about, I think, to help people understand that certainly something like homelessness, people think you're either homeless or you're not, and it's black and white. And actually, if you have spent many years, whether you've been living on the street or whether you've been living in insecure accommodation for many years, it has a really, really significant impact on you for much longer than when your housing situation is resolved.
Sure.
So I think it's important that lived experience, I guess, is one way of trying to help people understand that people come with a whole set of life experiences that need to be recognised and accommodated and understood in order to understand the whole person.
Sure.
Because you could just look at somebody and say, well, you're now in a flat, everything's fine.
Yeah, exactly. Funnily enough, it doesn't stop there.
It doesn't stop there, and I think I think that's really valuable for us to understand in the context of all sorts of scenarios. And I think we talk about people almost as if they come into situations with nothing before them, and I think that that's one of the real frustrations, isn't it? And I think that's back to that kind of social justice message, isn't it? Is that actually, if what we think we're doing in care is just providing this sort of immediate health and in Maslow's hierarchy, if what we're doing is fulfilling those sort of basic roof over your head, food and the kind of healthcare you need to kind of get you
Sure.
up in the morning and out, then we're not doing the right job. It was a great, one of these sort of great phrases that people had in one of the organisations I work with in homelessness, which was about sort of, we don't just give you a bed for the night, but we give you a reason to get out of it. And I think it's that sort of thing that actually what we're doing in care is we're providing people with the life that they want to live.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the bit that I think lived experience and other things enable you to understand.
Mm-hmm.
And I think organisations, particularly with some of the very interesting work around kind of life stories that's happened with people who are being supported and living with dementia, I think are vitally important, because they are saying, look, there is a whole story. People come with a whole life behind them, and actually a whole life ahead of them too. Yeah. Let's not stop at this point. This is about finding out what's next for people, what's the excitement for them in the future.
Well, you've got, in whatever capacity care or support is effectively being delivered, you've got, from a life perspective, you've got a person, and then from a service perspective, you've got helping that person then find purpose in whatever the context that ultimately looks like. Part of the reason why I was asking you about your purpose is because, I'm no expert on this, but I'm pretty sure that we're, to some extent, we're anthropologically, if that's the right word, geared to have a purpose in life. And just because you're a vulnerable person, again, in whatever context that looks like, you need to have a purpose. You need to have a kind of a reason for being. I love the analogy that you gave. Requote that one for me again, just to make sure I can.
So that we don't just give you a bed for the night, but a reason to get up in the morning.
There you go. Yeah. There you go. That sums it up beautifully. Yeah. It really encapsulates that kind of thought process. So Hestia sounds like a fantastic organisation.
It's a great organisation. Really worth looking it up, Simon. If you don't know about it, and certainly I'm sure be happy to talk to you much more about that as well.
Please do. Again, I have a sneaking suspicion we could probably do a whole episode just on Hestia
off
the back of that one. So
certainly I could get you somebody very exciting to come and talk to you about Hestia.
Please do. No, I think that would be wonderful. So slight change of gear. So there are a couple of really big subjects that are important to kind of care and support, and things that you're particularly passionate about. I know that you mentioned before that for NCF, digital is a massive area of work for you.
Sure.
I think just on top of digital, when we first met at the Future of Care event, it was just after Chris Papadopoulos's talk about robots in care. So that's something I'd like to talk to you as well. So can you give me a breakdown of your perspective and give us an understanding of what you see as happening from a digital perspective over the next few years?
So I think that there will be nothing that happens within care that won't have been affected by digital in the next 10 years. I think it's just going to impact on every single element of the work that we deliver. And the reason why I say that is I think you could look at almost any other industry and see the very, very significant transformations that have happened within there. And why should care be any different in that sense? And also because I think we are beginning to build a really good evidence base about how it is improving and transforming people's lives. So I think there's two sides. I mean, I think there's two sides to how care will change, and the bit that I think people will get most excited about is the bit about how it will directly impact on the services that people receive, and actually their ability for them to take much more control of that. So, and it's not my phrase, but I do like to say it. I think it will enable care to shift from being this person-centred vision of care that we talk a lot about, and it being a much more person-controlled approach to care. So actually digital will facilitate people to take a much greater control of their lives. Some examples of that are obviously being tested and piloted at the moment, and some people feel quite it raises quite strong opinions in people, but there are lots of trials going on at the moment about use of kind of voice activated systems within people's homes, your Alexa or your Google Mate or whatever it might be. Other models exist.
Models exist, of course, throw that
but,
one in.
that those sort of things being put into place to really kind of enable people to, get messages from families, to be a sort of close connection with people. So those sort of systems, I think, we will see much more commonplace within people's homes. Some organisations are already embedding their own versions of those. So there are members of ours who have kind of tablets by everybody's door, which are used as ways of kind of checking in with people in the morning. So I think there's lots of sort of non-intrusive type tech that will just become much more of our day-to-day reality, and some really exciting and empowering sort of stuff. So I was up the other day to a member who's got a bit of a innovation hub, and seeing some really easy stuff about supporting people who live independently, to take more control, say for example, of meal times and diets and things, and having in place microwave meals with on the microwave a kind of pen that enables you to tap onto the food label, put it in the microwave, and then tap the pen on the microwave, and the microwave knows exactly how long to cook it for, exactly what temperature to put it for, and tells you, it's just so things that can support people to live more independently. The use of sensors and things is growing phenomenally. Sensors are hugely cheap types of tech to use, and so the ability for sensors to be used within people's homes, all sorts, if you can have a sensor on the tap that tells you, and a sensor on the cupboard, and a sensor on the glass that tells you if the glass has come out of the cupboard and the tap's been turned on, the likelihood that somebody's drunk something is probably higher than anything else. And so
Sure.
so there's lots and lots of that sort of stuff that I think will just become commonplace. And we are already beginning to see people moving into care settings who are coming from much more digitally enabled homes than into the care settings, and they won't want to do that. So there'll be a customer drive around that as well. Often people talk about kind of Wi-Fi usage, and that will be part of it, but it will be much more about, when I was at home, I could open the curtains with my app. I could switch the lights on and off. Why is it suddenly now I have to call somebody to do that?
It's interesting how, effectively what you're saying is that it's going to be could be a consumer-led transformation.
Yeah.
One of the things, I was chatting to somebody not so long ago, and this is not specifically about a kind of enabling, not from the perspective, of care tech enabling residents or people who are receiving care in any way, shape or form, but that actually that some of the younger generation coming into care as a career, and we'll definitely come on to the kind of the professionalisation of the care worker and making it a good job for people to aspire for. But that some people are going to start saying, oh, hang on a second, if you don't have this decent piece of care planning technology, then
why would I come? Why would I sit and write?
Exactly.
I mean, I think it's completely realistic that that's what's going to happen. People will just say, actually, what have you got? What have you got
exactly.
in place? I say to lots of members, if you want to have a successful recruitment day, take Pepper the robot with you, and stand them because I think that's what a lot of care, and I know people get very, very exercised about this, particularly about the use of robots in care. So I'm delighted to talk about them. But actually, this is being trialled in other countries, and there's some work trialling of it going on here as well. And it won't do everything, and it won't replace everything, and people will still talk to people, ultimately. But actually, there's some things that might be done. I mean, if you talk to me about my own personal care, and I knew that there were options, for example, to have a lavatory that washed me, rather than a care worker having to do that, and I was able to take that option. Of course.
Yeah.
That would be my choice. If I could have some sort of exoskeletal suit or something that enabled me to get myself up in the morning, those are the choices I would make. And I think that's, people, I don't know, we have a sort of a notion, don't we, that these things will take away communication or connection with people. I don't think they'll take away good, high-quality connection with people. I think what they might take away is some of the stuff that if we think that's about great care, then we're slightly missing the point.
Sure.
So if what it means is you can use some tech that means instead of having somebody come in 4 times a day to help you do essentially kind of functional activities, you could have somebody come twice a day and talk to you.
Yeah, have a more meaningful engagement. Maybe that's what you choose. And I like to. I think it's important for people to challenge some of the things that I know people say is people don't want to be around robots. People don't want to have human contact replaced by robots. And I like to ask them to tell me what they think a £38 billion industry is in the States. Mm-hmm. What do you think that is? I'll let you answer that one because I've got no idea.
It's the robotic sex industry.
Oh, wow, okay.
There's a lot of people who spend a lot of money having robots take part in human interaction. We've got to sort of stop thinking in the way that we currently do about what people's perceptions are and how people want to engage with all sorts of new opportunities and tech that are out there.
It's an interesting one because I think maybe it was that Future of Care event, or maybe it was something else that I'd ended up seeing. One of the care robots, whether that be Pepper or whether that be another one of the robots that are out there. I think there was there was a resident of a care home of whom the robot went and got them a cup of tea. Now, if the carer had the opportunity to have a meaningful conversation with the resident whilst the robot was going to go and make a cup of tea, that seems like a reasonable trade-off. I guess where some people are going to be concerned is going to be around it's an age-old narrative, but the robots are going to take our jobs. People didn't like tractors when they turned up at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and the world seems to be a better place because of that. So,
Well, I think people. I think we have got to think about this realistically, and I think it's all part of that debate about what does the future care workforce do. Because actually, if we are having the level of debate that is about who goes and makes the cup of tea, then we've kind of missed the point in a sense. Because what is it that we want people, we absolutely recognise that, as I've said, that we have a low-paid workforce. We don't have a low-skilled workforce. We have a highly skilled workforce who are able to deliver multifunctional roles and deal with incredibly high levels of complex need and high acuity, etc. And actually, what we want them to do and what we want to recognise is the skills that they have. So I think, and alongside this, we know that every single day we have 110,000 vacancies in the care workforce. Would we say if robots took 110,000 of those jobs, that would be okay?
It's quite a good question to ask, isn't it?
We think we need 625,000 more workers by 2035. Would we say if robots took 625,000 of those jobs, that would be okay? I just think we have to have a really open debate about what we want care to look like in the future and therefore what we want care staff to do. And we can't just have that debate on our own, and I think that's part of the problem for the care sector, is that often we have this debate on our own. We need to be having this debate with people who are either currently living within care services, working age or older, or people who might be moving into them or utilising them in the next 15 to 20 years' time. Because the version then of what you might want somebody to do will be much more geared on in terms of what we think, what we want those staff to do. And then we can have a proper debate about what we want the robot to do, which won't look like a robot then. That's the other thing. I think, we've kind of, we just get a little bit stuck on some of these issues because it's change, and change is frightening, and
and inevitable, of course. The only one consistent is going to be change.
Well, that's right. That's right. And let's have that proper debate with the politicians, but also with the people who are going to be consuming care or using care in the future, and their families and relatives, and the communities that they're in. Because I think that the other big shift that care, as we talked about at the beginning, is seeing itself less as a sort of standalone organisation, kind of parachuted into a community, which I think a lot of our members have never felt like, because they were often charities that came from a local base or were traditionally part of the kind of local authority makeup. But I think there are lots of care organisations that have kind of appeared within localities in a sense. So I think we we need to have that kind of discussion about where does the care organisation fit within the community, where does the where does the kind of workforce fit in that sense? What is the community going to need? We had a very interesting presentation. We had our own conference a week or two ago, and we had Cormac Russell speaking there. I don't know if you've come across him, but he would make for an interesting podcast.
I haven't. I've heard of him, and I've been kind of informed that he's someone that I should learn more about. So,
yes, so he advocates something called asset-based community development. But I mean that question, he posed a question, a challenge to the members who were there, which was sort of who else could do your job for you? What else is happening within the community that could enable some of the things that you do to be delivered? And I think I think it's just these sort of fundamental questions that we really we're at quite a juncture in terms of thinking about the future of care, the future funding of care, the future workforce, the future delivery. We know that we've got growing demand. We know that we've got real gaps in the workforce. We know that we've got fundamental kind of challenge to the way the system is funded. We've got to think differently.
Oh, yeah.
For it to happen.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? Are you aware of a thing called Moore's Law?
No.
So Moore's Law is the law of the exponential growth of technology over a period of time. Mm-hmm. So if you look at it on a graph, it's just one that goes like that. At the moment, I feel like we're kind of at the tip of the iceberg. Like technology, it's just starting to get interesting. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? If we were having this conversation a couple of years ago, well, we wouldn't even be having this exactly the same conversation because things have come along quite a long way. But I feel like we're on the tip of the iceberg from the development of not just technology as a whole, but also kind of the convergence of those technologies and then how all of those work together. And I mean, that's macro, that's just what's happening in the world, but then how do we apply that into the sector to make the provision of care a better, more sustainable place in the future?
Yeah. And how do we make that not frightening for people, but also how do we make sure we've got the right set of skills and expertise within the sector to take advantage of that too, and not be taken advantage of. And I think that's always the challenge for people, particularly trying to bring technology into the sector, is that they either get a kind of rebuttal that people feel that they're trying to sell them something that they don't need, or that people see them as their saviours and answers to all their problems, and they're neither of the above. They are part of a picture. And,
sure.
Organisations, a bit like any kind of change programme, need to see the introduction of digital as a strategic move and clearly articulate what they want to have changed by the end of the whole process. So they're not just buying bits of kit, in a sense. They're building a better care model or a...
Sure. What do you think from the perspective of kind of let's call it technological adoption from the sector as a whole, because there's lots of people that kind of espouse a message where you should just go digital. I've got friends who run care homes who say, I haven't found anything that's fit for purpose from a care planning perspective. I'm just not going to do it. You've got some people who will say things like, what's tech? Well, not quite that question, but somewhere along those lines.
Yeah.
And there seems like a certain amount of reticence. Let's just talk care planning specifically for the moment, but there's a lot of value to be had from the types of care planning technology platforms and things that are out there at the moment. How are we in a set of circumstances at the moment where so many people kind of think, oh well, I'll kick that off into the long grass for the moment, and we'll think about tech later on down the line.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think it's interesting. There was some work that was done last year or in the early part of this year, which was funded by the Cabinet Office, which was looking at particularly cybersecurity in the care sector and the adoption of an information governance structure called the Data Security and Protection Toolkit, which I won't go into too much detail about now, but is a useful framework and tool for organisations who are thinking about GDPR compliance, etc. So that piece of research essentially found just what you've relayed, that actually you could split the sector into three parts, and I think that research sort of showed it in equal parts, which isn't my experience of so much, but that was, I think that was in terms of who got engaged in the project in a sense. But yes, you've definitely got those people who are just do it, get on with it. This is what's going to happen. This is what we need to do, and I think for those organisations, that's a fantastically helpful contribution to the sector, because what we're able to do is then showcase them and use them as an example and an opportunity to really share best practice. And one of our members, you might have come across, called WCS Care, has taken that a stage further, and they've developed an innovation hub within their home.
is it Russell? Have I got the name right?
Ed Russell.
Ed Russell, that's
and
it.
Christine Asbury. So
Sure.
what they've done is they've developed an innovation hub, which they have on a weekly basis. They open up and they encourage organisations from across the care sector to come and see a range of different innovations in place, which includes care planning software, which includes circadian rhythm lighting, which includes acoustic monitoring, so all sorts of things, food and all sorts of different types of technology, and encourages people to come in and have a look at that and really see it in practice. Because of course, if you don't know what you don't know, then
Of course.
where do you start?
Yeah.
So there are organisations who have done that, and as I say, we're incredibly grateful to them and to the suppliers they work with, who are very happy to kind of showcase and move that forward. There are other organisations, and I think what's interesting about all of this is it's often not a size thing, or perhaps it is a bit of a size thing, in that I think for very large organisations, it's an incredibly difficult decision to make. So lots of large organisations don't have a digital care plan, care planning approach, because I think the transition arrangements are very complicated. There's lots of, and I'll come on perhaps to questions about the regulator in that context as well. But so that they're really, they find it really difficult to work out which one of these to go for, and often that complexity is made even more difficult to engage with, because they might offer a range of different types of services. So maybe they offer some nursing services, maybe they offer a hospital, maybe they offer home care, and actually, none of these systems necessarily cover all those in the best way. And then you've got very small organisations, some of whom jump on the bandwagon immediately because they're excited by it and they think it will be a good transformation, and others who just say, well, eventually somebody will tell me I have to do it, and at that point I'll get on board. So we've got one of those bell jar kind of curves around that, and I think we're still at the very early adopter stage in a sense, because we think that there's probably about 15 to 20% of the sector who is on digital care planning, and
Sure.
we've still got 80% who are sitting, writing,
Thinking about it.
Well, not 80% who think I'd love it if there was 80% thinking about it.
Yeah,
I think
sorry.
there's probably another 20% thinking about it, and another 60 who are going, maybe next year we'll talk about it.
Have you read a book called Crossing the Chasm?
No, should I?
I'll get you a copy. It is about the not care specific, but it's about technological adoption over a period of time, and how that tends to play out. They've done huge amounts of market analysis around that. So you mentioned the bell curve. They've done the whole analysis piece and written a whole book around that. So I'll get you a copy. It's absolutely fascinating.
I'm reading a book about pig wrestling at the moment. Which
A book about pig wrestling, okay.
Recommended to me by one of our members, which is about problem framing and problem solving. And actually it's very relevant to this as well, because it's
not
all about...
Not actual pig wrestling?
No, I don't. Well, I haven't got to the end of it yet. We might get to wrestle a pig, I'm not sure. But it's it's about how we get stuck in those kind of problems. And I think people do that with the technology stuff as well. They get stuck with sort of, there's only these suppliers out there, or it's got to fit my care plan.
Sure.
And of course, care planning is one of those really interesting things which people invest an awful lot of cultural process in. So the way we care plan is about the way we deliver care.
Yeah.
So for somebody to come along and say, well, that's great, but actually, you've got to, instead of calling people, you've got to call them residents, or instead of calling, it begins to kind of get under people's skin, and at the end of it all, they might think, well, actually, no, we're better off. At least we know where we are with paper.
Sure.
And I mentioned the regulator earlier, and I think they have a very interesting role to play in this, and I think they know that they and they're busy thinking about how they might change their approach, because obviously one of the other challenges for organisations is if they feel that what they're doing in any innovative space is going to be perceived as inappropriate or high risk or whatever by the regulator, then they're not going to make that. They're not going to make that shift.
Sure.
Until the regulator said yes, it's okay.
One thing that struck me the other day, and I've mentioned it to a couple of people, but also as well, if you've got again, I'm just using care planning as an example, but if you've got quite a fragmented care planning technology landscape,
Yes,
let's say,
yeah.
how is the CQC, and this isn't necessarily just a question, this is just kind of an open question that people need to be kind of need to consider. How will the regulator on a inspection by inspection basis understand the landscape of
Suddenly we need
of
them
technology?
to be experts in, Windows, WordPress, suddenly we were...
The plethora of technology, the whole stack type thing.
Absolutely,
It's not just understanding care anymore, it's understanding...
Yeah, and I know that if I look at... they've had to learn how to do that in the context of some other areas like learning and development and things, that some of which might have moved on to electronic systems earlier on. But suddenly they need to be experts in those, and they're not. They're not. That's not what they signed up to do. And it's the same for the care providers. It's not. They haven't got that skill set or that set of relevant expertise and information in-house, so they're looking for that from organisations like us, and that's why we see it's such an important part of what we can offer. I think so. One of the things that we're doing to help support them around that is that we, in partnership with a number of members of the Care Provider Alliance, have set up something called Digital Social Care, which is an organisation. Well, it's a project really, which has been funded by NHS Digital to support the care sector to embark on their digital journey. So we're just about to launch a new website next week around that, and developing a whole sort of range of guides and support for organisations to go through some of that really challenging sort of tasks like procuring and knowing the right language to ask, knowing the right things to ask, how to embed it within organisations, and how to set out your digital strategy and that kind of thing. So really, I think we need to support organisations with that. The other thing it is really important to mention is one of the pushes around digital transformation is from the NHS.
Sure.
So they're very keen on the integration of health and social care data. We're very keen on the integration of health and social care data. And one of the things that they're pushing for is compliance with this thing called the Data Security and Protection Toolkit to enable this safe transfer of information. But what shouldn't be forgotten is the NHS has been on a digital journey for quite a number of years. £4 billion was invested in Paperless 2020 in the NHS digital journey. £23 million was put towards social care.
Sure.
Over a 3-year period. A lot of that has gone into local authorities, so very little going into the independent care sector. So actually we're asking organisations to make very, very significant investments in terms of skills, knowledge, expertise, to deliver against something that they're not quite sure how it's going to improve and change. So it's back to that kind of evidence piece. We need to give them and some of those funders and decision makers the real evidence about what change this might make.
There's quite a lot in there, isn't there? From the perspective of what needs to be going on in the psyche of people that are involved in the sector in whatever the form that looks like. There are an awful lot of, not that like there isn't always, but there's so many things that seem to be going through a bit of a shift at the moment, and that's again, it comes back to my feeling is that this is just the tip of the iceberg. Let's hope that it's not crises that draw out the transformation that's needed. Let's hope it's kind of as much as it can be a kind of an ongoing transformation that keeps up with this Moore's law, with the development of technology, and not just technology, but it's cultural. It's the way that people live their lives, which is probably an important part to take into consideration with all of this as well.
I think that some of the things that were real objections, and I can completely understand them. So when members were starting to use, for example, smartphone-based care planning software, they were finding that there was an increase in relative complaints, because they said staff are busy on their phones all the time. They didn't. So that, and of course people have to find ways around that. But that it's just a really interesting shift, isn't it? So, and we are. New generations won't have this. So people still look at somebody sitting in writing and they say that's real work. And somebody on their phone must be doing something fun.
Yeah, on Facebook or Instagram or whatever else.
Exactly. Or yes. So we need that, and that will happen probably relatively quickly. There are ways of enabling people to understand that this is work-based. I was talking to a member the other day, and the way they got round it was that they just had a corporate brand put on the back of all the phones, so people could suddenly immediately see
this is a work thing rather than
this is work that's going on here. So it was about that.
So workforce challenges are one of the biggest, let's say, issues facing operators at the moment. What's your view on turning care into a career of choice and the professionalisation of the care workforce?
Yeah, well, I think you're absolutely right that where many organisations are struggling profoundly is about not just attracting the workforce that they need, but also keeping the workforce that they need. And we know from the Skills for Care statistics that at any given day, we might have up to 110,000 vacancies within the sector. We know that there's particularly high turnover of roles within some parts of the sector. Home care is a particularly challenging environment to retain staff within, and we know also the particularly detrimental effect that things like changes or absence of managers have on quality of care within settings. So it's fundamental, that we get this right. In terms of getting to a position where care is a career of choice, I think that much of that connects in terms of the point where people make some of those choices is about how we create a narrative about the care sector as a whole. And I guess I go back to my mantra about this being a sort of social justice sector, this being something where people can come and have a real impactful change, support people to make some real change in their lives. I think it's a helpful analogy. I don't know if you agree that, I like to talk about, the health service is sort of life-saving, social care is life-changing. These are the sort of things that I think will encourage people to be part of organisations. However, of course, that doesn't detract from some of the other things that impact on people. So one of the big issues is clearly the level of pay within the sector. We know it's a given, it's a statistical fact that it's a low-paid sector. We've had the introduction of the minimum wage, and that has been obviously very positive for individuals working within the sector. But what it creates problems for organisations in terms of how they manage that increase in the minimum wage, particularly when they come to think about the sort of differentials within organisations, so how they enable meaningful transitions between roles, and one of the ways that people have traditionally done that is through pay differentials. So how they manage to continue to put those pay differentials in place is obviously part of the difficulty for organisations. So there's something around pay. There's a lot of research that's happened within Skills for Care and within a lot of our organisations as not-for-profit organisations about value-based approaches towards recruitment, and very importantly, value-based approaches towards employment. I would say. I think, we talk a lot about kind of person-centred ways of caring. We need to look at kind of, make sure that we are centering our we're focused on kind of employee-centred ways of delivering those services as well. I was listening recently to or reading an article about Travelodge, which was putting itself forward as the most flexible employer in the country. Well, I mean, that's what the care sector should be thinking about, those kind of things that will enable enable individuals to sort of see the sector as something that recognises and values that they come to work as whole people. Many people, you asked me about my motivation for getting involved in care. Many people I've spoken to have a very strong personal story and narrative about why they've got involved in the care sector. If we can, learn from that and learn from their experiences whilst they're delivering great quality care, and recognise that they have a whole life as well, and recognise the caring responsibilities they carry out both for childcare but also for others within their families, then we will be seen much more as an employer of choice in that kind of context. So there's lots of things that I think we can do. I think that governments, politicians have a really important part to play in that, whether it's about supporting professionalisation of the workforce, or whether it's talking with respect and dignity about the work that the workforce does. I hear way too many politicians talk about care and end with statements about being in a care home's the last place I'd choose to be. This isn't respecting the work that individuals do day in, day out. So I think there's some real things that we can do that change the story about care, and I think that will encourage people to get involved. We've talked a little bit about the digital journey. I absolutely agree with you that this will be one of those deciding factors for people about the kind of organisations they choose to go and work for, those that are digitally enabled versus those that aren't. I think people will start to vote with their feet around those kind of issues, much as they might about other issues such as pay and other areas. We need to put in place some really creative career pathways, I think. One of the things we talked about earlier was about the number of different organisations involved within the sector, and we know that about 60% of the sector is SMEs. So actually it's really hard if you're a care worker within an SME to look at those positions of progression and growth and see that they're occupied by people who appear to show no intention of departing in the near future, and in fact the employer is busy trying to hang on to them and keep them in those positions for as long as possible. So where does that individual go? Well, if we're smart, they stay within care, and we find routes for them to be have their past experience recognised and get them to move into other organisations. If we're not smart, they go and take that to hospitality, or they go and take that to the retail industry or wherever else where they might get increases in terms of responsibility and so forth. So I think there's some things that we can do in those ways to kind of make it more of a structured sector for those with career interests. You asked about the professionalisation of the sector, and I mentioned earlier that we work a lot with UK partners, and in each of the other 3 nations within the UK there are professional workforce. There is a professional workforce, there's a register of those workforce, and there's lots of work going on in those countries. There's lots we can learn from that. It hasn't all worked perfectly, hasn't necessarily transformed things totally, but I think there are some really important messages within there about how people feel about their own roles, about how employers feel that it supports their recruitment because they can see people are on a register. It can speed up the recruitment process. I mean, one of the things that I think we need to get a lot smarter about as a sector about the time it takes from people to show an interest in the job to actually getting the job. And all the time we're working in competition with other sectors, and if they can get there quicker, then people will go and work for them. So there's some things that I think we can learn from that professionalisation in other countries and think about how we might adopt that here. I think there's cost attached to that, of course, but there is huge cost to the sector about this constant merry-go-round of people leaving organisations. Again, digital has a place to play in this, and some really interesting possibilities perhaps in the future about how we might recognise where people are feeling concerned about their jobs. We might recognise when people are, what's the peak moment that we need to offer support to people to stay within their roles. There's things that we can build in through digital systems to ensure that we're maximising the opportunity to encourage people to stay within the organisations that they're in.
That makes a lot of sense. Tell me about the care badge.
So I am proudly here sporting the care badge. Where's yours, Simon?
Good question. I haven't got an answer for that, unfortunately. I just need to get my act together, quite frankly. So
the care badge is a new initiative which has been set up, and NCF are very pleased to be involved with that, and Every Life Technologies and Care England and others are involved with it as well. We're very pleased to be part of it, and it's an opportunity to, I wear it as an opportunity to engage people in a discussion about care, and it's really to have an opportunity to talk to people about the value of care and the value of care work that's delivered. So, the ambition for the badge is that we get as many care staff wearing the badge as possible, but also the friends and allies of care workers to be wearing it as well. So those who are interested in care, those who perhaps have somebody who's being supported within the care system, because those are the people who absolutely understand the integral value of care across the whole community.
Got you. I mean, it's a wonderful campaign, and it's in its infancy.
Very
it was
early days, yeah.
a couple of weeks ago. Was it launched?
Yes. Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, hopefully this is something that people will see and recognise, hopefully as being kind of a positive beacon to encourage people to think about care and the care sector in a more positive light. And the fact that it's got ambassadors such as yourselves, the guys at Every Life, Professor Martin Green, obviously he's going to be a big part of that campaign as well. It's good news, and hopefully it will be something that we can get behind as well to kind of bang that drum, help make sure that people know what's going on.
Well, I think get people talking about care. I mean, I think it's one of those, people often badge services, don't you, as kind of Cinderella services or whatever. Well, this is, the care, this has got to be the opportunity for care to kind of shine, and this is one way of doing that.
I like it a lot. So one of the things that we haven't touched on specifically, but one of the things that we've kind of talked around to a certain extent, is around culture within service providers. We've talked about values and all of that type of how that relates to recruitment. But I mean, I see culture and kind of building one's cultural assets as being almost like an operating system, a way in which to make decisions. I know it gets referred to from the perspective of recruitment an awful lot. I mean, it's probably one of the areas where it's most successfully used. But again, I see it as a kind of a slightly broader picture. How important do you think is it for service providers, operators, whatever type of organisation it is? How important do you think it is for people to build and design their culture?
Well, critically important, because that's, that people join organisations and people stay for kind of culture and the leadership of the organisation. So it's absolutely critical that you get that right. And I mentioned about earlier when we were talking about digital, that people invest a lot of their kind of cultural sort of assumptions within things like their care planning system, because they talk about the way that they want to approach care, the way that they want to deliver care, and so I think what's very apparent to me in the organisations that I visit in my role within the National Care Forum is that the culture of an organisation is absolutely connected to its success in terms of how it delivers care. And clearly that's why the regulators picked that out in the context of well-led as one of the kind of key criteria around that, but also caring within that, so that that there's a kind of cultural approach to that too. So yes, it's fundamental. I think what's also really what's interesting within organisations is obviously you can have a kind of culture that sits. An organisational culture that maybe sits within if you've got a group or an organisation that runs a number of homes or a number of home care settings, clearly what you've got to try and ensure is that whatever's sort of set as the organisational culture and approach within head office is replicated within the individual organisations. And I think that's very challenging for organisations spread across a large portfolio or a large geographical area, and something that requires constant working and constant kind of vigilance to have in place. But there are things that I think organisations do very successfully in terms of how they embed that within their induction, how they particularly encourage ideas, innovation, through all parts of the organisation, where it's possible to, they look at areas like the necessity of hierarchies, for example. So this, and I think what we're beginning to see is different types of organisation develop in response to some of that. Mm-hmm. So I'm very excited by, we've got one of the first employee-owned organisations within the care sector in Middleton Hall. I think we've got some really interesting models of a kind of autonomous models of team working being embedded through wellbeing teams. So I think, we as a sector, we're learning about how some of the other successful models of culture that maybe are more familiar in other industries can lend some really positive messages to care.
It's interesting. That's one of the, from a commercial perspective for my business, what's great is we're getting more and more inquiries from people saying we want to design a fantastic high performance culture because we want to build a sustainable care home business and we want to deliver outstanding care and we want to create that operating model, but we're growing and you mentioned kind of trying to do it at scale. It's easy if you've got a smaller business, but then if you've got a multi-site operation where you've got a huge team, how do you embed that into the behaviours of the team on a day-to-day basis? And it's we're relatively young business, we're not even 3 years old yet, but even though we as an organisation have been involved in those types of projects literally from the beginning, and it's something that I'm hugely passionate about, it's only recently where before we would get involved in a project where people would come and present us with what they wanted to achieve and all of their problems effectively. The shift that I've seen recently are, we've got problems because I don't believe that we're embedding our culture effectively, and how can we help set the context of what our operating system is? So even the conversation's starting to change, and I think that's a really positive thing, because it's becoming, for whatever reason, whether it's just seems to be more of a popular conversation, or it's almost becoming cool to build a culture, or design a culture, because obviously you can have a culture by default, and obviously that's where bad things happen, of course. There seems to be a greater emphasis on that, and I think that can only be a good thing, because coming back to, I think culture applies to absolutely every facet of an organisation. But coming back to the workforce conversations that we were having earlier, if we want to keep people within the sector and not get bored, let's make going to work fun. Let's make a role that it's challenging and may not be quite so glamorous at some points. Let's give people, come back to purpose, let's give people a reason to want to turn up to work. You mentioned turning up to work, being their full self, creating an environment where that's the norm, making sure that that's the rule as opposed to the exception. I think you mentioned it earlier as well. We've all got a role to play in that, in making sure that that's the case. So
and I think lots and lots of emphasis on how what is the culture delivering. I mean, culture has to deliver as well, in a sense. So are we able to see that by working in this particular way, back to the evidence, that actually we're achieving better outcomes? And if we are, why wouldn't you work in that way?
The way that I think about it, so you've got your culture and your operating system, the way that you operate within whatever type of provision it is you're involved in, and there's a direct link to your reputation, because how you turn up and how you deliver against your vision, your values, the behaviours that are attached to those values, those are the things that are going to create your brand and your perception from the communities and things that you serve. It's not just a case of, oh, well, it's great because people feel better about turning up to work. Operationally and from a sustainability perspective, it makes sense. It's not just a woo-woo concept that, I don't know, people are just getting passionate about these days for whatever reason. It genuinely will create a huge shift on every facet of the sector. So it's a drum that I'll be banging pretty hard over the foreseeable future, we should say. So
good.
You've always been in leadership roles, or at least as far as I can tell from your LinkedIn profile, or at least you've been in leadership roles for a long period of time. So you must have accumulated some fantastic leadership lessons. What would you say the most important leadership lessons that you've have learnt over your career?
Well, I am a very big champion of partnership. I think if you one of the most important things to realise is that there is real strength in doing things together, and that partnership could be with other organisations. That partnership could be creating stronger links within the organisation itself. There's all sorts of ways, but I just think there's something about being very open to working in partnership and open to collaboration that enables you to both show your leadership but also learn within leadership, because I think I am, like you perhaps, constantly learning and constantly interested in new ideas, new perspectives, new thoughts, and it can be quite lonely as a leader otherwise. And I think partnership and collaboration have been very successful, important parts of my career. So
it's interesting how much energy you get out of a good collaboration, a good partnership, isn't it? As you say, like having a leadership role in whatever capacity that looks like, it can be quite lonely because of the responsibilities that are involved with it. So being able to, I get immense amounts of energy from having conversations like this where we can sit and chew the fat on big old subjects and things, and hopefully there are some of the things that I've shared today that will be useful for you, and 100% definitely vice versa, and obviously for the audience out there. I want to make sure that they're getting a lot from today's conversation. So no, partnerships, I couldn't agree anymore. So I've got two questions just before we wrap things up. Two of my favourite questions that I seem to ask everyone anyway. So what's the best piece of advice that you feel that you've ever received?
Well, and followed.
Well, I suppose it's got to be to a certain extent. But what's the one that you've at least heard and thought, oh well, that makes sense?
I think it is about the only things that will give you satisfaction have to be connected to your values. I'm sure I haven't got it. Nobody gave it in a succinct sort of version, but I think just that sense that actually, certainly for me, and I suspect it's the case for lots of people, if you can do something that is in alignment with your value base, your satisfaction, your motivation, your attention to detail, is all going to be heightened in a way that, that exponentially, I think.
Sure.
So, and I think that's that's the important message, isn't it, about selling the vision of care, selling the vision within organisations, that actually, this is all about human values, back to the human rights debate. So it's I think it's about that.
Got you. I'd link that back to one of our first conversations around purpose as well, to work out who are you as a person, what are your values, and how can you purposefully go out there in the world and achieve whatever it is. Doesn't matter if it's care or anything else. It's for you to you use the the kind of the phraseology, to being your best self when you turned up at work or whatever it was. It's being able to do that on a day-to-day basis.
It's got to have
of course.
meaning. It's got, if you're lucky enough to be able to choose a job that's got meaning for you, you're going to be doing an awful lot more with it than one without.
Couldn't agree more. Okay. Last question.
Yes.
If you were to provide somebody in the sector, somebody who was looking to make a positive impact on the care sector, what would that piece of advice be?
Oh, so that's a different piece of advice you're looking for now.
It could be the same piece of advice, or it could be slightly different.
Somebody who's coming to make an impact. Well, I think look to the future. Help us, if you want to make a positive impact on the care sector, help us to articulate what that future will look like, because we need lots of fresh voices, fresh ideas and new ways of thinking to ensure that we, to help us all on that journey, because there's huge amounts of willing, there's huge amounts of expertise already within the sector, but we want more, we need more, and we're open to more. So come and be involved and help us to carve out what that future will be.
Fantastic piece of advice. Vic Rayner, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.